So you've probably heard by now that the corrupt cucks on the Supreme Court of the United States, whose job it is to interpret the Constitution and make sure that the United States government is adhering to the Constitution, just ruled that United States federal judges and federal courts, whose job is also to interpret the Constitution and make sure that the government is adhering to the Constitution, apparently just no longer have the authority to issue nationwide injunctions on laws, executive orders, or governmental actions that violate the Constitution. And they can only do those things now within their jurisdiction. Now, I guess silly us for assuming that a federal judge's jurisdiction was fucking federal. So I'm no legal scholar or anything, but due to my understanding of, words, silly me over here was, I guess, thinking that if a federal judge whose job it is to interpret and enforce the United States Constitution tells the federal government to stop doing unconstitutional shit, that would apply federally. Now, if you don't know what an injunction is when the government does something that is potentially illegal and a judge is like, stop. You are no longer allowed to keep doing this potentially illegal shit until we have a court case to decide if it is or is not actually illegal. To put it into perspective, imagine it like this. You get a Tommy gun and you jump up on the teller's desk at a bank and you just start robbing the place. And a cop is just strolling by and he sees you up on the teller's desk waving your Tommy gun around and he runs in and tells you to stop committing this crime. Now look, I know that's a hard to believe hypothetical because if Uvalde taught us anything, it's that the cop would run around the corner and hide until everybody was shot. But for the sake of the example, this one particular cop isn't a coward and he runs in and tells the bank robber, you, to stop robbing the bank. And then you, the bank robber, gets to turn around and say, no, what I'm doing, I feel like is perfectly legal, and until you can prove otherwise in the court of law, I get to continue robbing this bank. And then you finish robbing that bank and you walk right by the cop to the bank next door and rob that one too. And you continue just running around town robbing banks until the cop goes to a judge and says, hey, this should be illegal. We need to stop this dude from robbing these banks so we can get him on trial and actually get this taken care of before he does more damage. And the judge is like, okay, yeah, I agree with you. You're allowed to stop him from robbing banks, but that only applies in this particular town. So you just go to the next town over and continue robbing banks because that judge's order no longer means anything because you're no longer in his jurisdiction. That is exactly what this ruling did, except the difference is instead of robbing us of FDIC insured money, they're robbing us of our constitutional and human rights. So now if your state sues the federal government and is like, hey, you need to stop waving your Tommy gun around and stealing these people's fucking human rights, and a judge is like, yeah, I totally agree, this is fucked, they need to stop. They now only have to stop in your state, but they can keep doing it the next state over. And if the next state over is run by somebody like, I don't know, Ron DeFascist or the Tyrant on Tires, you may not be so lucky to have a federal judge that puts an injunction on them stealing your constitutional rights. And the core constitutional right that spurred this whole ruling in the first place is birthright citizenship. Not a particularly ambiguous one there, not a whole lot up for debate. If you're born here, you are a citizen. Period. So when the Kentucky Fried Führer signed his royal decree, executive order, that birthright citizenship was hereby revoked, the courts were immediately like, the fuck it is. And they issued a nationwide injunction stopping the federal government from robbing people of their constitutional right to citizenship. But now that the Supreme Cunts of the United States turned around and were like, yeah, federal judges aren't actually allowed to enforce federal laws anymore or federal injunctions, there's now currently only injunctions in states that have actively sued the federal government and got an injunction issued. And this means that the nectarine Nazi can run around to nearly half the states, stripping people of their rights to be a citizen indefinitely. And this also means that there's absolutely nothing to stop Apricot Adolf from signing executive orders doing whatever he wants. The day before the election, he just wants to suspend it to stay in power. He now has that ability. He wants to have an executive order saying that cops can shoot anybody who has a meme making fun of J.D. Vance. He can now do that. He wants to sign an executive order saying you are allowed to own brown people again. He can do that. He could sign an executive order saying that anybody who has not sworn an oath of loyalty to Orange Julius Caesar will be thrown in a gulag, which would obviously include any political opponents he may have. And the only way to stop him is that each individual state has to sue the federal government and get an injunction to stop it, which takes time and money and people with the willingness to do it. Time where if he signs an executive order canceling an election the day of, you won't have. Time where if he signs an executive order to deport all of the people who disagree with him to some foreign gulag, you may not have. Hell, what's now stopping him from signing an executive order saying that states don't have the right to file injunctions against his executive orders, which then would allow him to ignore all of those injunctions against his executive orders until they file a lawsuit getting an injunction against his executive order saying that he doesn't have to pay attention to their injunctions. And that's just if he doesn't just outright ignore the Supreme Court's rulings altogether, because they basically said, yeah, he should follow the Constitution, but we really have no ability to force him to do that. Like, seriously, what the fuck fuck do you exist for then? That is literally your whole job. You only exist to force the government to follow the fucking Constitution. That's it. That's the whole reason you get the black robe and the gavel and shit. It's literally your one job. If you can't do that one thing, you are useless, irrelevant. You have no reason to exist. Look, I know I tell you overcooked potatoes this shit all the time, but I think it bears repeating because apparently you have the memory span and attention of a fucking goldfish. This is Nazi shit. This is dictator shit. Not figuratively, quite literally, this is authoritarianism. And if you support it, you are a Nazi. If you have not vocally denounced this administration and their actions at this point, you are absolutely no different from 1935 Germans standing at those rallies doing the fucking Elon salute. That is who you are, and history will remember you as such. I cannot overstate how bad this is, and I am not overreacting, I am not over-exaggerating, I just passed a fucking history class. And this should not be a difficult concept for anybody to grasp whose IQ is high enough to ride the fucking kiddie roller coaster at the carnival. And if you still can't grasp it by this point, you need to sit this one out and let the adults take care of it, because you are clearly too fucking stupid to have an opinion on anything more important than what brand of glue stick has the best flavor. And let me be clear, this is not about left or right, this is not about Democrats or Republicans, because you know what, honestly, Democrats have just as much dirt on their hands for allowing this to get this far, for them fighting everybody who's actually willing to fight this with the entire weight and authority of their position, but fighting actual fascism with strongly worded letters. Fuck you, Chuck. Yeah, this isn't left and right, Democrat and Republican. This is Americans who value democracy and freedom and everything we claim America stands for, versus Kim Jong illiterate and some discount dictatorship run by an emotionally and mentally unstable senile man-child and his malignant band of morons who are the most hateful, vile, and incompetent people on the planet. It's time to stop being a cosplatriot simping for Saffron Saddam and start being an actual patriot, standing up for your country and your fellow fucking Americans. Get with it.